Scott, you ready? He's not paying any attention. He says yes.
I feel like it's Monday.
All right, well, good evening. Thank you for coming back and seeing part 2 of Money of the Bible. Got to carefully balance all this stuff up here. All right. I wanted to get started with some things that I kind of felt like I had to rush through last night at the end, speaking particularly about all of the gods, goddesses, different religions that were surrounding God's people. And we see that most pointedly in Acts 17, where Paul is in Athens, right? And he takes a tour around and he sees all the gods and goddesses. It's in Acts chapter 17. And I think he even comments on it there. It says now, and starting in verse 16, now while Paul waited for them at Athens, his spirit was stirred in him when he saw the city wholly given to idolatry. So he was upset by the fact that as he walks around, there's all these gods and goddesses, and the only acknowledgement of the true God is, in fact, the unknown God that he mentions in verse 23. I passed by and beheld your devotions. I found an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God, whom therefore ye ignorantly worship, him declare I unto you. And so he's going to tell them about this unknown God, who is the true God, who created the whole universe and all things and sustains it. And he does that. But what he's shocked by or appalled by, certainly he had confronted it before. He grew up, of course, in Tarsus. Then when he's in Jerusalem, he's going to be somewhat insulated from it. But all around Israel, all the people there, in the north, Syria, and the south, you've got Egypt. To the east, you've got the Nabateans and others. And then, of course, Rome and Greece. All of them had their own pantheons of gods, and they put them on their coinage. And so you're seeing them on their coins. Every day they're interacting with these. And this would be appalling to any Jew. So God's people were surrounded by this constantly. Both the Jews and then later the Christians are going to be dealing with this all the time. And it's not really that different today. I know that there's the culture war that we're fighting all the time, and it gets a lot of the headlines, right? So we're always fighting things that are going on right now in our society. It's becoming more and more commonplace and accepted in society for homosexuality, homosexual marriage, transgender. All those types of things are grabbing headlines all the time, and we've got to stand true on all of those grounds. We've got to stand true against abortion. We've got to stand our ground scripturally against all of those things, and that's true. But in addition to that, we've got denominationalism, Catholicism, and then other false religions out there that are bearing down on us all the time. And Catholicism is not very much different than being surrounded by those gods. As you see on the screen, they have these icons, right? They've got statues of Jesus, of Mary, of the saints, and a complete misunderstanding and misapplication of these things. They've essentially set themselves up idols, right? And personifications of God in the famous Sistine Chapel on the screen there, giving life to Adam. And, there were even wars fought over this. The iconoclasts, who were people who felt like this was wrong and you shouldn't have these icons and you shouldn't have paintings and all of these things, fought against those who think you should have them. Guess who won? The people who have the icons won those wars. And so we have all of those paintings, all of those statues. And in fact, it's kind of like a pick your own religion, right? I recently went door knocking, and I came in contact with several people who were just absolutely, no, I don't want to have any interest at all Usually when I go door knocking, I go door knocking pretty often, and usually I have a pretty good day. Usually there's several people that want to chat. Usually we get at least a Bible study out of it. But this day I was just having no luck at all. It was just closed door after closed door, rude people, just not having a very good day. I finally met somebody who was having a nice conversation with me. I invited him to come to worship. And at the end he said, well, my partner, we're a homosexual couple. How does your church feel about that? Right? All right. So you're confronted with it right there. You're presented with the opportunity. How are you going to answer that? And what I answered to him was, well, we're biblical. We try to stay biblical. I would love to study with you. We'd love for you to come to worship service and meet with us and study about it. He's like, well, what's the attitude towards that? I said, well, we take a biblical attitude towards it. We don't feel that that's a scriptural and sound marriage. But I'd be happy to sit down and study with you. We're not going to hate you or be mean to you or anything like that. And he said, well, we'll probably go down to the Baptist church. The Baptist church down here, they're real open about it, and they're very accepting about it. It's a choose your own religion, whatever fits me, right? That's what we're dealing with in society, is that people are shopping around for the religion that fits their lifestyle, their choices, not making choices based on what the Bible says or what God wants for our lives, but instead finding the religion that suits them. And that's even true on the screen. You've got I call this the giant Jesus statue slide, right? How silly is this? You can not only choose your religion, you can choose which giant Jesus statue you like all over the world. There's the famous one, of course, in Rio de Janeiro. This one in Bolivia, it isn't there anymore. It got struck by lightning and burned down. And I personally think if you make a giant Jesus statue that gets burned down by lightning, you might want to reconsider your choices in life, but evidently not. There's one in Poland, Peru. There's one in Eureka Springs, Arkansas. There's the famous flying Jesus, because it looks like he's kind of launching off there in Indonesia. There's one in Spain. There's one underwater in Key Largo, Florida, and it faces the one underwater in Genoa, Italy. I find that kind of odd. There's even one made out of Legos. I think it's not only disrespectful towards God, but I mean, it's anti what God has wanted for us. He doesn't want us to make icon statues of Jesus and worship those things. He wants us to carry Jesus in our hearts, right? And that's true of the coinage of the Jews, working back around towards the money of the Bible. The first two commandments of the 10 Commandments, you shall have no other gods before me, and thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. All right, so the Jews took this very seriously, right? And they would not have icons. They would not have statues, not even of animals. And on their coinage, they would not put any statues of birds, that's of above, anything on the ground, right? Any kind of animals, or anything in the water, no fish or anything like that. This is very, very different from everyone around them. Everyone around them is putting gods, goddesses, people, animals all over their coinage. And even if you're just trying to go about your daily life as a Christian and you're trying to live, apart from the world, in the world but not of the world, you're going to look different from everybody else, right? And that's what God's people found themselves to be like in their coinage. On all of their coinage, you're going to see that there's things like wheels, stars, cornucopias, and text, usually praising God and then stating the name of the ruler of the time. So on this particular coin, you've got Hebrew text right here that praises God and then mentions the ruler. Compare that to the Roman coinage. What you're looking at here, it's mostly images of the emperors on the front, starting with Julius Caesar. He was the first one to really start to do that as a living person. And then you have them deifying themselves. You have anytime you see DIV or DIVI on a coin, that's saying that the person on there is divine, that they are a god. So that is elevating the emperor to the status of a god. And they really were big on doing this to help spread Roman culture throughout the Roman Empire. So they would take over a place and then they would establish the cult of the emperor. And they'd have a giant statue of the emperor in there, and people would make sacrifices to the emperor, and they would get approval to do things like trade and things of that nature. And in addition, you see symbols of their religion. You see gods and goddesses on the back of the coins as well, telling of some virtue. Sometimes they're personifications of things like peace or justice. And we do this, similar things even today. In New York, what's the famous statue that's there, right? Statue of Liberty. Okay, it's a personification of liberty. And it's a similar thing, except they're elevating those ideas to the status of gods and goddesses. All right. Continuing on. Any guess as to what that is right there? Yeah, good call. That's the edge of a dime under an electron microscope. Guess how many ridges there are on the edge of a dime? Best guess.
Best guess. 780.
Wow, that is a terrible guess. Lower. It's 118. I know that was your next guess.
Well, it was not the 7, it was a 1.
1, yeah. 118 ridges on the edge of a dime. A quarter has 119, in case you ever need to win Final Jeopardy. So why are there ridges on coins? And here they are on the edge of a dime. This was actually invented by the Greeks and the Romans. The Romans probably stole it from the Greeks. They were really good at stealing things and making them better. But the Greeks had a problem with their coinage. And that was that people would get a coin, and let's say you had 20 drachmas. You had these silver coins. And what you would kind of do is you would take a chisel or you would file off the edge of that coin. And you try to make it round or whatever, but it's called clipping. And you would be clipping the metal from those coins. If you did that enough times, you'd have another coin, right? And all you had to do was come up with the design and try to stamp it, make it look halfway decent, and now you've got a whole extra day's pay. I mean, it was worth a lot, that silver coin. That's a huge problem. So how do you deal with that problem? Well, one way was to sentence anyone to death who was caught doing this. That's a pretty good way. Seems like you might want to avoid getting caught doing that. But people still did it. And I suppose you could just plead innocence if you're trying to pass one of these coins. Well, somebody gave it to me, right? So what they came up with is they would put ridges on the edges of coins. And now, if you clip the coin, the ridges are not going to be there. It's going to be clear that that's been a devalued coin. The Romans took it another step further, and a lot of their coins will have dots, a dot pattern around the edge. That's pretty good if you stamp that coin right in the middle and got a perfect strike. But in general, the ridges are a little bit better way to go. So why do I comment on that? Well, I think that we can use coins, ancient coins, as little object lessons. So one way to tell that a coin was authentic was it had the dot pattern or it had those ridges, right? Well, those ridges are kind of like difficulties that we face in our life. things that we come in contact with that are problems in our lives. And when we come in contact with those, it's never been promised. Sometimes people think, well, you're a Christian. Christians have it easy, right? Everything's easy for Christians. They're happy all the time, and everything's great. When in reality, life's very difficult, even for Christians, right? We were never promised that everything would be easy. In fact, we're promised that people will persecute us and things will be difficult, right? And James 1, 2 through 4 says, "My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into diverse temptations, knowing this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience, but let patience have her perfect work, that ye may be perfect and entire, wanting nothing," right? The idea here is that those ridges, as we overcome them and we continue to be Christians and continue to live as God's people, even in the face of persecution, those ridges show that we're not counterfeit, that we're real, that we're true Christians because we've had our faith tried. Romans 5 says the same thing, and not only so, but we glory in tribulation, also knowing that tribulation worketh patience, and patience, experience hope, right? And that's what it's all about. We have the hope. The reason Christians are to be a happy people, even in the face of difficulties, is because we have hope. We have the hope of heaven. Someday we won't have hope anymore because it will be fulfilled. We'll be in heaven. But now, while we're on earth, we have that hope of the perfect heaven, right? We don't expect life to be perfect. We don't expect the world to act accordingly. We don't expect the government to do everything that we'd like the government to do. We expect the opposite while here on earth, right? I don't expect the government to do Christian things because the government is not very Christian-like, right? But sometimes we get caught up in the politics and elections and watching the news cycle or whatever it is, and it can be easy as Christians to get frustrated living in this world. But the message here is that we can overcome that because we have a hope, and we're to be able to give an answer for the hope that's inside of us. 2 Corinthians 12:10, "Therefore I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches and necessities and persecutions, in distresses for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong." And that's one of the dichotomies of Christianity. We're strong because we have Christ and we have that hope. Even the Christians, when they were persecuted, and we're going to talk about it in a few minutes when we get to this point later tonight, but when the Christians were being persecuted in the Circus Maximus, they were being fed to the lions. The Romans loved these animal battles with gladiators and that kind of thing. They weren't really big fans of Christians getting fed to the lions because the Christians would go in there and they would just sing or they would pray as the lions would attack them. And honestly, after you've seen that 4 or 5 times, I mean, it's not very pleasant to watch. It's not any fun at all. They never fight back. And that's one of the ways that Christians overcame. Eventually, it became unpopular to persecute Christians in that way because it was just not fun to watch, right? All right. Another point from last night that I didn't feel like I really had time to go into as much is about intrinsic value. And so I put this up yesterday and talked about it briefly. But even our coinage has intrinsic value. That is the value of the metal that is inside the coin. But all of their coinage had intrinsic value. That was where the value was in the coin, was the fact that it was made of gold or made of silver or made of electrum or made of copper, and therefore had value. And over time, I mentioned that inflation hit them, but I didn't really get to go into that, and I think that the picture doesn't really do it justice. So originally, in the first century, a denarii was 25 denarii to 1 auris, right? And over time, what you see is this inflation hit. So it's still 1 golden auris because it was still pure fairly pure gold, like 95% gold. But the silver content in the denarii kept going down. They would make them smaller, they would make them weigh less, they would make them out of other metals and then coat them in silver. And eventually they were doing what's called a silver bath or a silver wash, which is just dipping it in silver to give it that silver look when it comes out. But it really has almost no silver content, so that by 402 AD, you are dealing with 4.6 million denarii to one golden aris. So people have just devalued the currency to the point that they're not even able to really do transactions of business. And we look at the end of the Roman Empire. Some people would say that the Roman Empire never really ended, that essentially the Roman Empire is still in effect today, because you have the Roman Empire, then it moves to Byzantium, then eventually the Catholic Church kind of comes over, takes over, and eventually reestablishes itself in Rome. Essentially, you still have something of a Roman Empire. But really, the political Roman Empire started to end right about that time, right around the 400s, when it just kind of devolved into chaos. Rome got sacked, and the whole system of government changed. And inflation and the loss of the coinage is definitely part of that. Could happen again. People love to compare America to Rome, right? But Rome didn't have the types of inflationary controls that we have now. Not saying that, gas prices aren't high and food prices aren't high, and inflation at 8% or whatever it is right now isn't bad. But compared to Rome towards the end, it's certainly not as bad as it could be. And I don't see the exact comparison to Rome. So you have this system where you've got all these coins, all this money from different areas of the world, different civilizations, different time periods. But because they were made of silver and gold and electrum, and they have intrinsic value, they would continue to circulate for hundreds of years. So you have to come to terms with that as you're trading in the market. Essentially, even though you have coinage, and even though I'm sure there was some regular trade going on, you would encounter coins that you would have to negotiate. Everything is negotiable. And so if you had, let's say, a shekel of Tyre or a half shekel, that could be worth as much as, even though they're both silver coins, 4 denarii. And later, and they called them tetradrachmas, so 4 drachmas. So they're worth 4 denarii. Over time, it would be worth more and more denarii as the denarii were devalued. And so you'd have to spend hundreds of denarii to get a pure silver coin. And they're dealing with this money from all over that area. So some of these places tried to kind of copy each other's money in terms of size and silver content, but you find different civilizations kind of cheating on all of that. So as you go into the marketplace and you try to spend any of this money, it's going to be rather difficult. All right, and then the other thing that we talked about last night, but that I didn't feel like I got to cover in depth, was about money terms in the Bible. And when you're looking at money terms in different translations, it can be somewhat difficult to understand what's being communicated depending on which translation you use. And the example that I wanted to use was Matthew 22, 19 through 21. So in the King James Version, where it uses penny, that's a perfect translation for the time, because the English penny was a silver coin, and it was about the size of a denarii. It's even abbreviated D. We pointed that out last night. But I wanted to look at a couple of others and compare them to other translations and see how other translations point this out. So Matthew 18:28 in the New King James says, "But that servant went out and found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. And he laid hands on him and took him by the throat, saying, 'Pay me what you owe.'" That really is the best way to translate that text, is say 100 denarii. Just say what the coin actually is that's in the text. But Wycliffe, Tyndale, and the King James all take that, it's ekaton denarii, as 100 pence. That's what they use. New King James, NASB, and the ESV all say 100 denarii. But the ASV uses 100 shillings. The NIV has 100 silver coins. And then we get into these that are kind of just very, very loose translations, right? Like the Message. The Message says $10. And the New Living Translation says a few $1,000s. Well, both of those can't be right, right? It's got to be one or the other or somewhere in between. Well, $10 is a terrible translation. 100 denarii, it's 100 days' pay. That's like 3.3 month, right, worth of money. It's certainly not $10. If you pay me $10 for 3.5 months worth of work, I'd be pretty upset. A few $1,000s, maybe. That's a little bit closer. But you really have to be careful when translations try to use modern day terms, because 100 years from now, $1,000 might be a lot less money, right? $1,000 in the 1950s was probably a lot of money. You probably buy like 2 cars or something for that. So using modern day terms doesn't always work out too well. All right. And we look at Mark 6:37. It says, "But he answered and said to them, 'You give them something to eat.' And they said to him, 'Shall we go buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give them something to eat?'" So if they're going to feed 5,000 people, they're saying it's going to take 200. We're going to have to spend, 2/3 of a year's worth of money to buy them all food. And the NKJV, NASB, and ESV all say 200 denarii. Wycliffe says 200 pence. Tyndale has 2.C. pennyworth. I thought that was kind of weird. And then the King James has 200 pennyworth. So not the best translation for us. And the ASV has 200 shillings. The NIV says half a year's wages. The Message says spend a fortune. And the New Living says we'd have to work for months to earn enough money. So obviously taking some liberalities with the translation there. Any questions or comments up to this point? Yeah?
Yeah, the original.
25 to 1. 25 to 1 Oris. Yeah, eventually. Yeah. And a denarii was originally a soldier's pay. So it's interesting. We see coins being minted since the denarii was supposed to be a soldier's daily wage. You see armies as they're marching; those guys expect to get paid, right? So you see them carry mints with them and mint coins while they're marching to battle to be able to pay their soldiers. The most notable example that a lot of people collect is Mark Antony. He made legionary coinage. So he made coins that had the number of all of his legions, and he made those while he was en route to battle. And so people try to collect all the legions, all the numbers of the different legions. I used to have some of those, but I eventually said those don't really fit. They're not really biblical coins, and so I cut them out of my collection, sold them to buy other things. And we're going to talk about that a little bit as well. Yeah, good question. Any other questions or comments? All right. I brought some more books. I wanted to share with you some resources, and then I'll also type up a resource guide that you can use if you're doing this online. So, or doing it later from the recordings, you will have a resource list of books that you can use to learn more about these coins, but also just to show you the wide range of different areas you can go into in numismatics and in coins of the Bible. So these first ones I showed you yesterday, these are all kind of standard guides, and I have them up here as well, but Guide to Ancient Jewish Coinage, Guide to Biblical Coins, and Money of the Bible. I mentioned those last night, and all of those are great books. The one that I started with is this one, and it still has all my notes and everything in it, but the Handbook of Roman Imperial Coins. This book is fantastic. It has kind of a biography of each emperor and the dates, and then it talks about all the different types of their coinage, but it's not exhaustive, but it has samples of everything from each emperor. So it's a really good Roman coins book. You've got Ancient Coins Through the Bible. That's this book. It just came out recently, also really good, and it goes into a lot of detail on city coinage and Roman procurators and all sorts of very detailed coins. It considers a wide range of things as money of the Bible. And Eric too. I got to talk to the author of this book as it was coming out. I think I got copy 37, so he even autographed it, which was nice. At the time, I think it cost $150. Now it's gone down to $75 now. But what's great about this book is it's got just tons and tons of color pictures of the coins and huge lists of every coin for each emperor, each member of the emperor's family. It's a very exhaustive one-volume set, so it's really nice. I'm going to trip again. That's what I'm going to be known for, the tripping preacher. All right, I've got this book on biblical numismatics right here. This is a really beautiful volume. It covers different coins and talks about where they're found in the Bible and deeper meanings behind each one. Really nice book. Roman imperial coinage is sort of the standard set. This is a multi-volume set. It started with the coins that are in the British Museum, which is the best collection of coins in the world. And there are basically no pictures. It's just, so it's not very fun to read. But it's just lists of the coins with their inscriptions and details about each one. A lot of times you will see coins called out by their RIC number. That's this book, Roman Imperial Coin. So if it's got an RIC number, you can look it up in here and see information about it. A really good beginner's book is this Ancient Greek, and it's Handbook of Ancient Greek and Roman Coins. It's by Whitman. Whitman makes a lot of collectible collector books for, like I've got one on early American colonial money. They make them for Civil War money, and now they have one on ancient Greek and Roman coins. So this is a really good way to get started learning about ancient coins. If you wanted to start collecting, this would be the book I would recommend that you read. We've got Roman History from Coins, which is this little book right here. Really quick read and really interesting. So what he's done, Michael Grant, who's a famous historian and author, he has taken points in Rome's history where there are kind of gaps, and he's looked at Roman coins from that time period to tell some of the history, the lost history of Rome. It's a really nice, interesting read. You've got Coinage and History of the Roman Empire. That's right here. This book, it's a 2-volume set. And I find it kind of funny because he says Coinage and History of the Roman Empire. So you would think Coinage would be volume 1, but history is volume 1, coinage is volume 2. If he had asked me, I'd have told him to flip the title around, maybe. But he didn't ask me, so I don't even know him. But it's a really good book on the history that you can draw from Roman coins. And it has some overlap, of course, with biblical history. And then monumental coins. This book is really interesting. It takes coins of, so here's the one on the temple in Jerusalem. He gives a whole bunch of information about the layout of the temple, and then he talks about that temple coin that we talked about earlier and draws conclusions from it. He does that for a whole bunch of buildings that no longer exist or that just exist in ruins. And he figures out what those buildings look like based on the coinage. Really interesting area of study. We've got the gods, goddesses, and heroes of, there it goes, told you. Gods, goddesses, and heroes of the ancient coins of Bible lands. What's really cool about this book is it's going to look at all the backs of those coins and talk about why those gods and goddesses are on the backs of that and how it affected the people of Israel or early Christians. And then you've got Greek coins and their parent cities. This book, which just looks terrible, it's in terrible shape, but it's a great book. If you can find a copy of it. I found this copy for, I think it was $25, and it was just absolutely falling apart. But it's a wonderful book. You can look up like Ephesus in here, and it's going to tell you about the city, tell you why Diana is or Artemis is the goddess that's there, turns into Diana under Rome, and really kind of lays out each of those Greek cities. Many of the ones that Paul visited are in here, and you can study the coins and kind of learn about those city-states. And then Roman, this is the most boring book in this whole collection. This is Roman Palestine, 200 to 400, money and prices. If you want to figure out what things could buy at the time, people always ask me that, and we're going to talk about it a little bit, very little bit, because it's really kind of boring. But this is the book for you. All it is lists of prices from different parts of the Roman Palestine area at different periods in history. It says 200 to 400, but he also talks about the first century in here. And most of the first century stuff he's getting either out of the Bible or from Pompeii. Pompeii, of course, got buried by ash and is a really good intact site to learn all sorts of things about daily life in Rome. But Money and Prices is the book for you if you want to read through a whole bunches of tables that just list prices and figure out where he learned that information. He must have spent just hundreds of hours combing through ancient documents for that information. Bible Lore and the Eternal Flame just came out this year and won the award for Best Coin Book from the American Numismatic Society. It's really interesting. Lots of stories about the coins that are found in the Bible. And then astronomical symbols and on ancient and medieval coins. This one just looks at stars, comets, planets, constellations on coins and talks about why they are there and what they are trying to prove. It's very, very interesting. And then my personal favorite, I have not finished reading this book yet. I just got it a couple of weeks ago. But Ancient Rome on 5 denarii a day. This thing is delightful. It's just hilarious, first of all. But it basically takes the idea of you're a tourist going to go to Rome, and it talks and tells you all about the customs of the day and what you could expect and how you can expect the people to act and what you can expect the prices to be for things. It's really rather a delightful take. I'm sure it took just tons of research. I don't know this author, but I've read about half the book so far and find it really, really interesting. So you can peruse those at the break as well and take a look at them. Other online resources, the great thing about online resources is they can be voluminous, right? They can be huge because there's no limit to what you can put online. And they can be very up to date. So as new coins are discovered or new types or new die sets or whatever it is, they're going to tell you that on these massive sources. One that's really useful to study about any emperors, any type of culture, is wildwinds.com. I don't know why it's called wildwinds.com, but I've just always used it. It's a really wonderful source. This is the page on Augustus. You can either have it with or without the thumbnails, but the thumbnails just pulls up all the images of all of Augustus's coins. It goes on for pages and pages and tells you all about them. If you have a coin you're trying to identify, you'll be able to do it here. You'll be able to, even looking through, if you can't read the legend around your coin, you can look through until you find one similar. You can search for different items to figure out coins where he's facing left or facing right, those sorts of things. It's a fantastic resource. And then you can click on any of those and it's going to give you the latest auction price for that coin. I don't think they're keeping up with that anymore, but it's going to tell you an auction price, so an approximate value of that coin. Pretty interesting resource. Another one is the online ochre, online coins of the Roman Empire, I think is what it stands for. Ochre. And that has a really nice outline basis of like, okay, if you have a picture of a Roman emperor on a coin and you want to identify him based on his picture, well, then you can look through all the pictures of all the Roman empires and emperors, and it's going to show you all of them in different profiles and different looks. Like Nero, for instance, we're going to talk about Nero at length tomorrow, but he changed very much over time. He looks rather thin and athletic, like me, and when he was young, and then not so thin and athletic when he was older as time went on. Again, like me. So I can relate to the poor Nero. All right. Before we take a break, I want to talk about getting carried away. That's me at PTP in my Roman Roman soldier outfit, riding on a Segway, which was my current chariot at the time. I want to talk about getting carried away with things like collecting. And I can relate to this and speak from some degree of experience. But I think that there are three areas when we start to collect something like ancient coins or ancient biblical coins or Roman coins. Anytime there's a collection aspect to anything, I think that there are some dangers that you face as well, just as a person, just psychologically and philosophically speaking. There's a dark side to collecting. And I recently this isn't unique to me, other people have pointed this out with books. There's a book on book collectors called Gentle Madness, talking about people like me who collect books and, pile them up to where they're just crawling through passageways in their house, and then eventually the books fall on them and kill them because, they had so many books, right? So they call that a gentle madness. It's gentle until it crushes you with the weight of the books. But there's a dark side to coin collecting as well, and I want to talk about that briefly. Just for anybody who's considering getting into this, I think that there are three different things you should be concerned about when you start to collect, and things that you should watch out for, things that you should guard yourself against. And the first one of those is just becoming an addict, right? You may think it's crazy to think, oh, well, he's a coin addict. He's going to be addicted to coins. However, one of the ways that you acquire coins is through auctions. Auctions can be quite exhilarating. I mean, have you ever bid on something at an auction and you got your hand going, and before long, you don't even know what you're bidding anymore. You just want to keep going. You really want whatever the item is, right? I really, really want one of those temple coins that I keep showing. I want it to be one of the cornerstones of my collection. I've always wanted one ever since I started collecting. When I first started collecting 20 years ago, they were like $1,000, and they were out of my reach at that time. I wouldn't be able to spend $1,000 on a coin. Every time one comes to auction, they seem to be just out of my reach. Most recently, I had saved up money just to buy that coin when it comes up on auction, and one came up for auction. And I had saved up, I know it's going to sound crazy, right? $6,500 to buy that coin. It did not go for $6,500. So as the auction was going, and after it exceeded the $6,500 that I had bid on it, my finger kept doing this, and I kept bidding, and I got up $8,000. I didn't have $8,000. It would have really put myself in a bad way had I won. Fortunately for me, I came to my senses, and as it got to $12,500, I was no longer bidding, and I was just crying that somebody else won my coin. So that coin always seems to be out of reach for me, and probably will remain so for some time. But you can get carried away with it. It's very possible to do that. You can get addicted to the exhilaration, and you can put yourself in a bad way doing that, financially speaking. You get that coin, and it's exciting, right? It's just like gamblers. It's just like drugs. And that then what are you going to do next to get that feeling again, right? And so you can get addicted to things like this. Another danger, and this isn't unique to me. This is pointed out by a guy called Classical Numismatist on YouTube. He's got a video on it. But he says you don't want to become a cranky old man or cranky old woman. Either one. And he says that there's this idea of the ancient coin collector is somebody is like a troll in a cave, and you're just kind of you're just a cranky person. You think you know everything. I like to tell people I know a lot about a little, and then I know a little about a lot. So when you're looking at coins of the Bible, I know a lot about first century coins from Rome, particularly the emperors that are mentioned in the Bible, and Israel, any of the coins of Herod, any of the Roman procurator like Pontius Pilate. I know a lot about those coins. I know a little about everything else. So you get outside of the first century, I start to not be as clear on all of those things because I'm very hyper-focused on coins and money of the Bible. But there is an aspect to it where you can kind of think that you know it all, and then somebody challenges you or says one of your coins is a fake or you misattributed it, and you can just get kind of cranky. You can get to be kind of a cranky old man. You don't have to be old to be cranky. So I would advise against that. And then the third thing I would watch out for, he puts it like this. He says, you don't want to become a dragon. He says, okay, what kind of a dragon? What do you mean? Well, he's thinking of like Smaug in The Lord of the Rings, right? Well, he's got this cave and it's full of gold, and he sleeps on his gold. He hoards all this gold. Nobody can touch my gold, right? And eventually it kind of adheres to his body, and he's almost indestructible because he's got all this metal all over his body. You don't want to be like that with coins in the sense that you hoard all this stuff and it's just about me and how much stuff can I get, right? We don't want to be like that. And it can be pretty easy to start doing that. You want to keep it in the social realm where you're sharing your knowledge with others and you're willing to let go of coins. Like I was telling you earlier, I sold all my Mark Anthony legionary coinage, because I just was sitting there and I was like, these don't really fit with, I mean, they're ancient coins, but they're not biblical. There's no real biblical connection. We don't need to hold on to those. I should sell those and buy something that's more in line with what I'm trying to collect. So with that, you knew sooner or later I was going to bring up 1 Timothy 6:10, right? For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, right? That thing is misquoted all the time. Money is the root of all evil, right? That's how they quote it. That's not what it says. It's the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. That's what we have to guard against, and that's true just as much as it is about hoarding anything, about putting our faith and our love and our time into things instead of into God and godly things, and storing up treasure where? In heaven, right? We want to store up treasures in heaven, not on earth, where everything, according to 2 Peter, is going to be melted. Even the very elements are going to be melted. All of these coins, all of these books, all of this stuff, someday it's going to be melted. It's going to be gone, right? And it won't be worth very much to me when I'm in heaven to have a coin of Salome, who helped kill John the Baptizer. I love that coin now. I think it's really neat. But if somebody came to rob me right now and pointed a gun at me, I would hand the coin right over to them, right, without any hesitation. It's not as important as other things. I think we should keep all of that in mind. It's a little early for break, but I want to break here because it's a good stopping point for the class, and then we'll reconvene here in about 10 minutes. If you want to grab some, you got refreshments and stuff again? So we got some refreshments. If you want to grab those, we'll take about a 10-minute break. That's all right. Thanks.
What? Yeah. It'll go to side one, let them know how many we shut it up. So. Y'all mind signing a thing to let you know that y'all are account? Yeah. So if anything comes to y'all.
That's gonna give me good. Out of all of these books, that's the most entertaining. The ancient Roman. Yeah, it has, that's the convenience one, right, so the one that has all prices, is all things, all about, where God was saying, this is extremely important. And this is the,
Test, test. Whoa, got it. That means we're starting back.
What did you do? All right. Gotcha.
This will be here.
A back, I'm not gonna use that as a backup, just so you know. There he is, kind of a Monty Hall. What? I don't know about that. I think I would avoid the let's make a deal look. All right. Are we back, Scott? We're ready to go? Oh, they can hear me. All right. Well, welcome back from break. We're going to get started on what counts as coins or money of the Bible. And I think the most obvious answer to that would be money that's actually mentioned in the Bible, right? Certainly can't argue with you have to cover the money that is actually mentioned in the Bible. And so we talked last night about this, but I will just reinforce it because the three greatest things for retention are repetition, repetition, and repetition. So I'll at least mention that throughout almost all of Old Testament history, there were no coins, right? We hit on that multiple times yesterday. So all the way from the Garden of Eden through the flood, Tower of Babel, patriarchs, Egypt, Egyptian bondage, period of the Judges, period of the Kings, there were no coins. Right at the end of the period of the Kings, coins are invented, but it doesn't look like they were used at all in Israel. As they get carried away into Babylonian captivity, the Babylonians were also not using coins yet, but the Medo-Persians, who took over some of the Greek states, that's where they learned about coins and where they started learning that technology. And the Medo-Persians are the first ones to use coinage. You go into the intertestamental period, which we covered yesterday. That's that 400 years between the Old and the New Testament, and all sorts of new technologies and lots of history takes place. Most notable thing in that time, of course, is Alexander the Great, who really shakes things up and changes the whole world. He Hellenizes the entire world, essentially Western world, and then eventually that all gets broken up into parts and everybody fights over that. And then you get into the New Testament and there's all kinds of coins and empires and coins from all sorts of empires. But we're looking at the coins that are mentioned in the Bible. The first coin mentioned in the Bible, we've already covered a good bit, but we'll mention it here, is the Persian daric, which is the gold coin. The siglos, which looks just like it, but is silver. I have 3 or 4 of those, I think, up here. And that was the standard with a 20-to-1 ratio. So 20 siglos into 1 daric. And the daric was considered a month's wage for a Persian soldier. They had this bimetallic currency. They were not the ones who invented that. The Lydians and Croesus, it looks like, is the one who invented the idea of having this bimetallic coinage. Before that, coins were made of electrum, which is a naturally occurring mix of gold and silver. All right, so that's the Persian daric, and that's we covered that at length yesterday. The shekel of Tyre is, well, before I did want to mention the verses on that. So for the daric, it's first mentioned in 1 Chronicles 29:7. The daric is mentioned there. They gave for the work of the house of God 5,000 talents and 10,000 darics of gold, 10,000 talents of silver, 18,000 talents of bronze, and 100,000 talents of iron. And I do have a talent over here. We're going to look at that on Sunday at more length, but that's a 75-pound weight of that. So you can imagine having 75 pounds of gold. That's a lot. Ezra 2:69 and 8:27, it says, according to their ability, they gave to the treasury the work 61,000 darics of gold, 5,000 minas of silver, and 100 priests' garments. These priestly garments were very elaborate and very nice quality, and so they're mentioned here because they were worth a lot of money. And then 8:27, 20 bowls of gold worth 1,000 darics and 2 vessels of fine bright bronze as precious as gold. Nehemiah 7:70 through 72 also mentions darics, and that's it. That's all the coins that are mentioned in all of the Old Testament. So if you just want to learn about coins of the Old Testament, you're already finished, right? And then we get into the New Testament coinage. And shekels of Tyre were actually, they started creating those during the intertestamental period. But I will go ahead and tell you, this is actually my favorite coin out of all coins ever. I love the shekel of Tyre. It is the most connected coin to the life of Christ and in multiple ways. And we're going to talk about it in more depth on Sunday as we look at the money that Jesus knew. But I will mention here that this is the coin that they would use to pay the temple tax. You would have a half shekel, which looks just like this, but half the weight. And then if you were paying for 2 people, you would pay a full shekel. So when Jesus tells Peter to go pull the fish out and it'll have a coin in its mouth to pay the tax for you and me, he's talking about a shekel of Tyre. Very high quality silver, as much as 97, 98%, which is very, very good for that time period. Rome tops out at around 95% silver. So there are no other coins in ancient history as pure quality silver as the Tyrian shekel. For that reason, they insisted that this was the only coin acceptable to pay the temple tax. But it features the god Malkuth on the front, and on the back, as you can see, there is an eagle. Well, what did we learn from the first and second commandment, right? This violates both of them, and yet it's the only coin that they would accept to pay the temple tax because of the high silver quality of it, and they were not allowed to make their own silver coinage. So this is what they required, and why you see the money changers. It's also the main coin that the priests would use, and therefore it is the 30 pieces of silver paid to Judas to betray Christ were 30 Tyrian shekels. The money that is paid to the soldiers that were at the tomb to lie and say that his disciples stole the body, well, they were paid in Tyrian shekels. So this coin very connected to the life of Christ, and we'll talk about it more on Sunday, Lord willing. We look at the Roman denarii, or denarius, denarius plural. This was soldiers' daily pay. We've mentioned it a couple of times, but it is mentioned in the Bible by name as a denarii. It was based on the Greek drachma. And when Jesus says in Matthew 22:19, show me a coin, he's talking about this coin, the denarii. And it's also famously in the laborers in the vineyard. That's what they were paid, a denarii for a day's work. But some of them didn't work the whole day, and that made those who worked all day upset, right? And his point there is that those who don't have to labor as long are still going to get to go to heaven, right? And we shouldn't begrudge them that, because we want to go to heaven too, right? That's what we want for everybody. And so that's the point there. On the show me a coin, we'll talk about that a little bit more on Sunday. But obviously in that instance in Matthew 22, what they're trying to do is trap Jesus, right? It even basically just says that in those verses. And I find it just interesting that the Pharisees are partnering up with the Herodians to do that. They never saw eye to eye on anything, right? They're always at odds with each other. And the Herodians are those who are following Herod, right? So who are they loyal to? Well, they're loyal to Rome, because Rome is who put Herod on the throne, and his sons and his grandsons on the throne. And so the Herodians would never agree with the Pharisees on anything, and the Pharisees are going to try to fight against that and instead have no taxes paid to Rome. So when they confront Jesus, they think they've got him in this situation that he can't get out of. But of course, Jesus says, show me a coin, and says, pay to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. So he finds the genius way out of that, as if they could trap Jesus. But nevertheless, I find that sometimes a common enemy will make strange bedfellows, and that's certainly the case there with the Herodians and the Pharisees. we get to the Roman Assyrian or as, and this is a more minor coin. It was bronze or copper, and the the Assyrians are 16 Assyrians to 1 Roman denarius. And this is the coin that we see in Matthew 10:29 and Luke 12:6, where it talks about two sparrows. 2 sparrows are sold for 1 Assyrian. And then Luke, I think, expounds upon that and says, well, or you can have 5 for 2. So you get, buy 4, get 1 free kind of situation. This is the coin it's talking about, 1/16 of a denarius. It's a larger coin. I have several of them up here. It's a larger coin, but it's made of bronze or copper, so it is not as valuable as a silver denarius, but it weighs a little bit more than a denarii, and it's made of copper. All right. You have the Jewish pruta and lepta. This is the standard. Pruta is the standard Jewish coin. So these are made of copper. As I said before, the Jews were not allowed to mint silver coins. So the only time they mint silver coins is when they are in revolt against somebody and they're doing it to assert their authority. We talked about reasons that different coins were minted. Well, the Jews, whenever they mint silver coins, what they're doing is they're showing their power. We're in charge now. We're in revolt against Rome or against whomever, the Ptolemies, whoever it was that was trying to control them. If they fight against them, they start minting their own silver coins. But most of the time, they're not doing that. They're minting copper coins. Herod minted only copper coins, and those are called pruta, and the smaller ones are called lepta. This is the famous coin from the widow's mite. This is an exceptional example right here, where it is struck solidly, and you can see the image on both sides. I have a whole bunch of them I was showing you, during the break. Almost none of them look like that, right? You can barely tell what the images are. And they would make these differently than they made other coins. They would have molds of them, and they would pour into it the metal, the molten metal, and then they would stamp it as it was cooling, and then they would break them apart so they can make whole bunches of them at once. They would make thousands and thousands and thousands of them. These were not worth very much. 2 lepta to 1 pruta, 128 pruta to 1 denarii, or 1 shekel. So these were not very valuable coins. You think about it being like a penny, sort of. We have 100 pennies to $1. It's not quite like that, because a denarii is certainly worth more than $1, so these were certainly worth more than a penny, but nevertheless not very valuable coins. Most of them do not feature images of people or animals in accordance with the first and second commandment. But it's interesting to look at some of the exceptions to that, and we'll do that on Sunday, Lord willing. So that's the extent of the coins that are mentioned in the Bible by name or by type. Now there are different types of each of those. There are thousands of different types of denarii, but we think we know which one it was that was the one that Jesus said, "Show me a coin," and whose image is that? Tiberius was the emperor at the time, and the most common coin like that is the one with Tiberius on the front and his mother seated as a god on the back. And I have a copy of that up here if you'd like to take a look at it during the next break. The second way that we could start collecting coins or looking at coins and money of the Bible would be geographically, right? And on the screen, you can see pretty much the entire biblical world, right? I always find it interesting to point this out, that Jesus, his entire life was contained right here. And he was only down here in Egypt as a small child. Most of his life was contained right here. But, of course, his impact is throughout the whole world. And Of course, Paul, his missionary journeys, he journeyed all the way over to Rome. He said he hoped that he could go on into Spain, which would be the absolute frontiers of the Roman Empire at that time. And that's what he was hoping to do. But that's the biblical world. So you could collect coins or study coins of the biblical world to better understand the missionary journeys of Paul or the travels of Jesus as he's going around that area. And of course, that starts with Greece and understanding that each Greek city-state had its own character. So we think of Greece as being together, and they were similar. They had a similar culture, but at different times in their history, they're warring with each other, right? Sparta is fighting with Athens, and they'll fight with Rhodes, and they fight with each other, and they each had their own nationalism, their own character. Each one of them has their own mints, and they will mint coins based on their culture for that Greek city-state. And we can actually learn a lot about some of the problems that Paul, for instance, comes in contact with as he's challenging that culture, as he's directly confronting the gods, goddesses, culture of that day. What is he going to run into? And some of the most beautiful coins, most perfect coins ever made are actually Greek coins, some of the earliest coins. It's really strange. This turns out to be kind of true of many things. It's true of the Gutenberg Bible as well. The Gutenberg Bible is one of the most perfect books ever made. It's amazing, right? So this is the first book printed. You'd think, well, they're trying to figure it out, right? But it's perfect. It's perfectly aligned. The text is really well spaced. Everything is just beautiful. It's one of the most beautiful books. The one in the Library of Congress is actually one of the finest copies of the Gutenberg Bible. If you ever get the chance to go to Washington, D.C., I highly recommend going to see it. And the Gutenberg Bible, of course, he did have some practice. Before he made the Gutenberg Bible, he printed indulgencies for the Catholic Church. So it's a myth that the first thing ever printed was the Gutenberg Bible. The story on that, just real quick, not to be too divergent, but it's interesting because it speaks back to what I was talking about earlier, this idea of icons and this idea of gods and goddesses that even exists today. I think we have trouble sometimes understanding, why did Israel keep falling into idolatry? It seems silly to follow these other gods after God had done so much for them. But we're guilty of the same thing. Not us personally maybe, but people today are guilty of it. And that's true during Gutenberg's time as well in the 1450s. The way he invented the press and he invented movable type is because he had invested in metal to make metal mirrors, because there was an icon that they would only bring out every so often at this festival. And when the sun struck the icon, this statue of whatever it is, I don't remember, some kind of saint or the Virgin Mary or something along those lines, if the sun reflected off of it and struck you, you were supposed to be healed. So they would have this big festival and thousands of people would come, and Gutenberg said, okay, I'm going to make these little mirrors and I'm going to sell them, and I'm going to tell people if they collect the sunlight that bounces off this icon, they can catch it in their mirror and they can take it home with them, and then they've got a memento of it that'll help heal them. That sounds silly, doesn't it? Right? People do it today. I was at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, and like any good church, they've got a gift shop right in there, and they sell statues of the saints and the Virgin Mary and Jesus and the like. And this poor woman, I sat there watching this. They were about to close, and she had, I don't know how much she spent. She must have spent $200 or something buying these little statues, and she was desperately trying to unwrap them and rub them on the stone that they have there, that they say that's where they laid the body of Jesus. She's trying to rub these statues on that stone while one of the monks was shouting at her, "We're closing, hurry up, say your prayers, get your blessings and go." And she's desperately, it's so sad, right? That people are still in that mode and that mindset today. And of course we know there's nothing to be gained by rubbing a statue of the Virgin Mary on the stone that Jesus wasn't really even laid out on. It's just really sad. But anyway, those mirrors, that went really bad for him because that event was canceled due to something very familiar to us, a global pandemic, the plague. The plague hit and they canceled that event. So he's stuck with all these mirrors. He's like, what am I going to do with all these mirrors? I could make movable type and I could make indulgences and sell them for the Catholic Church. And that's what he did. And so he was saved financially for a time. So that's the story of how Gutenberg invented the press. And speaking back to collecting things and getting carried away, one time, the only time I've really, really been tempted was somebody offered me a page of the Gutenberg Bible. And I really thought about mortgaging my house to get that, but my wife wisely talked me out of it. So I don't have a page of the Gutenberg Bible, but it's top of my list if I ever, they're about $100,000, so doubt I'll ever get one, but neat. All right, back to coins. Sorry for the divergence. But we get the Greek mints, and we're looking at all the different coinage from all the different Greek city-states. And each one is known for a different thing. And I just want to look at a few of them really quick. And I want to start in Ephesus because that makes the most biblical impact that I can think of, is we're in Acts. Let's turn Acts 19. And in Acts 19, and starting in verse 24, we have Paul in Ephesus, right? And all kinds of trouble is going to strike for him in Acts 19. Look at, starting in verse 24. For a certain man named Demetrius, a silversmith, which made silver shrines for Diana, brought no small gain unto the craftsmen, whom he called together with the workmen of like occupation, and said, Sirs, ye know that by this craft we have our wealth. Moreover, ye see and hear that not alone at Ephesus, but almost throughout all Asia, this Paul hath persuaded and turned away much people, saying that they be no gods which are made with hands. So that not only this, our craft is in danger to be set at naught, but also that the temple of the great goddess Diana should be despised, and her magnificence should be destroyed, whom all Asia and the world worshipeth. And when they heard these sayings, they were full of wrath, and cried out, saying, Great is Diana of the Ephesians. And the whole city was filled with confusion. And having caught Gaius and Aristarchus and men of Macedonia, Paul's companions in travel, they rushed with one accord into the theater. And when Paul would have entered into the people, the disciples suffered him not. And certain of the chief of Asia, which were his friends, sent unto him, desiring him that he would not adventure himself into the theater. Some therefore cried one thing, and some another. For the assembly was confused, and the more part knew not wherefore they were come together. And they drew Alexander out of the multitude, the Jews putting him forward. And Alexander beckoned with one hand and would have made his defense unto the people. But when they knew that he was a Jew, all with one voice, about the space of 2 hours, cried out, Great is Diana of the Ephesians. Can you imagine that? 2 hours they're crying out. They're so concerned that their craft, at first, is just the craftsman, that he's wounded because he's saying, look, there is no goddess Diana. This is all gods made of hands, and there's only one true God. And he's converting people so much so, he's having so much impact that it's hurt their business, right? Well, that comes out in their coinage. You see all throughout their coinage, the goddess Diana. I have one of those up here. She had her temple. It was one of the wonders of the world. It's a tourist attraction. It's a tourist trap. And these silversmiths would make things for people to take back home, just like the mirrors that Gutenberg wanted to make to capture the sun off the icon. It's the same kind of thing, right? And it's fascinating saying if Paul keeps preaching this, our temple's going to fall into disrepair. I read the account of an early explorer who went out into the Bible lands before they got to be touristy, before they were restored and some of these ruins were dug up. He went to go find them, and he went to Ephesus where it was just in ruins. It's kind of a swamp. And he found the temple of Diana. It's just the foundation. It was in complete ruins, almost nothing there. And he said he sat there on the steps of what used to be the temple of Diana, and he said the frogs were going. He says it sounded like the people chanting Diana, 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 just like that. So it's really prophetic. What he says here is like, hey, if this Christianity thing catches on, we're not going to have a temple to Diana. Well, eventually, that was the case. Fascinating enough, the temple of Diana had these columns. You see them on there, and there's also a meteorite, but that's another story we won't go into. But these columns were taken from there and used to construct Hagia Sophia, which is this great, used to be kind of a cathedral, then it became a mosque. But those columns from the temple of Diana are still there. And there's also columns from other places that were conquered to make the Hagia Sophia. So interesting stuff from Ephesus. But you can see what Paul was dealing with this goddess Diana and how seriously they took it. It's very similar to Rhodes. If you went to Rhodes, the big thing was the Colossus of Rhodes. And their coinage, I have one of them up here, features the Colossus of Rhodes, which is Helios, the sun god. Now at the time, they were still known for this. It was one of the wonders of the world. It had collapsed. It was laying in ruins, but it was still a popular tourist attraction because it was this massive statue of the Colossus of Rhodes. You see in Corinth, you have different icons that are pictured. Their coins were eventually known as ponies because they had, what's that called? Pegasus. Was featured in their coinage a lot. So you see Pegasus on a lot of their coins. So their coinage became known as ponies. You had another one that had turtles as a main character. Their coins known as shells or as turtles. And so Paul, of course, spent a lot of time in Ephesus. He spent a lot of time in Corinth. And you can see the different kinds of things that he would be confronting, different gods. And then notably in Athens, you have a similar thing. In Athens, which is Acts chapter 17, Paul's in Athens. And what does it say about the Athenians? Let's see. In verse 20, it says, "For thou bringest certain strange things to our ears. We would know therefore what these things mean. For all the Athenians and strangers which were there spent their time in nothing else but either to tell or to hear some new thing." So they wanted to hear new things. They wanted somebody to tickle their ears and tell them new philosophies, and they wanted to concentrate and talk about that. Well, what do you see on their coins? You see a lot of owls. There's an owl, right? I didn't hurt my toe. There's owls on all of their coinage. This is the icon of Athena, who is this goddess of wisdom. And maybe you remember that movie Clash of the Titans I think there was a newer one, but I remember the one from like the 70s or 80s from when I was a kid. It was always on TV. It was a little mechanical owl, right, that Athena gives him to help him along the way. That's this owl. That's this icon of wisdom that's supposed to help you. That's the idea that owls are wise. Comes from Athena and the Athenians. So, I point all of this out. We could spend hours and hours just looking at the different Greek cities and the different gods and goddesses that each one has. But I point those out to show for deeper study. If you want to look at the area and the cities that Paul went to, there's a lot to be learned from the coinage about those cultures. Another area, you continue to look at the Bible lands, not just the city-states, but as I mentioned, Babylon didn't really have coins, but everybody else mentioned after that period had coinage, and you can study those things. Certainly the Persians did. This is the Persian Empire, and you can see how far to the east they stretched, and of course encompassing Israel, and all of this area here was the principal area of it, but it stretched for a long way, and it stayed that way until Alexander came and conquered them. So we can study the coins of those areas, and there's very minor differences in the Persian coins. As I said, they kind of stuck with that standard of the dark and the sigillus, but there's very small changes of it. So there's all these little types that they have of them, and you can see why and when those changes were made. Then, of course, you have the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was massive on a scale that nobody had ever accomplished before. They took over and conquered most of what was the Persian Empire. The Parthians were kind of their enemies all the time. Rome never really beats them. There's a couple of times they win. There's a couple of times the Parthians win. They're always one of the plagues of Rome. They don't like the Parthians. And so they finally make peace with them. Augustus helps make peace with the Parthians, and this is part of his popularity, is they don't have to send their children off to war against the Parthians any longer and keep losing. He also helped capture some of the standards that had been lost, and that was very important to them. But you look at the massive Roman Empire. This was the world superpower of its day. And we looked at this image last night. This is the mints of the Roman Empire. So they would establish all of these mints all over their empire to help keep control, keep some kind of standards everywhere. So they used the same coinage all over the empire, but at the same time, they would localize it to deliver messages to different parts of the empire. And it's interesting to look at those messages, what messages they had for Israel, messages they had for different parts of the world, but how it's really connected to Christianity is the stability that existed as Jesus comes on the scene. Augustus has established the Pax Romana, the peace across Rome, and he's establishing how versatile the Roman Empire could be. This image, this map, is the lifeblood of Rome. It's the trade routes and roads of Rome. Nobody had done anything to this scale before. The idea of all roads lead to Rome, right? That's captured right here. And that allowed for not only stability and safety, because they were stationing guards at these mile markers, and they were making communication happen fast throughout, comparatively fast throughout the Roman Empire, allowing people to safely go places, allowing the gospel to spread safely and quickly compared to previous time periods. You can see that God planned the perfect timing for Jesus to come and for Christianity to spread throughout the Roman Empire. All right. I think that takes us to 7:45. We're going to take a short break. If you need to run to the restroom or grab another quick snack, we're going to take, let's say 10 minutes, and then we're going to start back. Even if you're not in here in 10 minutes, I'm going to start back in 10 minutes. So hurry back, and we'll continue on with the class. Thanks. Break this again. Yeah, I'm not messing with that. Copper plastic, almost entire.
Well, if you need some sparkleberry gum, glitter sparkleberry gum.
to do it so all the cameras can sync. So when I clap, that doesn't mean start clapping for me, so don't do that. But we'll do that in a second. Is this on, Scott? You're sure? Now I'm supposed to clap? You ready? Like that? All right. We're synced up now, so that's good.
Really, we just want to laughing. When we put it all together, you'll be like,
That's fantastic. All right, we're on the home stretch now, the last 35 minutes here. We're going to look at a few other ways to look at coins of the Bible, so we're not getting carried away and saying that all coins ever are coins of the Bible, all American coins are coins of the Bible because they say in God we trust. You know, you can't. I've tried this line of reasoning with my wife, and she does not agree that all coins are coins of the Bible. She limits me. So we're looking at ways to really examine that. And we're going to look at people that are mentioned in the Bible. That's another natural way to look at coins. So people who minted coins and have coins of them, images of them. Of course, we have Darius or Darius, and of course that's from the book of Daniel. We've already mentioned the Dark multiple times, but Daniel starts out in Babylonian captivity under Nebuchadnezzar. He interprets his dream. Later in chapter 5, it's Belshazzar, and he interprets the writing on the wall, right? Then he's under Darius or Darius at the end of chapter 5, and Darius eventually sends Daniel to the lion's den, which of course he survives, and it's this Darius that is pictured here on the coins, and he ushers in the Medo-Persian kingdom. No one really knows why he's bowing, but some people say he's bowing because Daniel survived the lion's den, and so he's bowing to God. I don't think they know that, but I do like that story. It's kind of a neat idea. The next main person that has coinage of him, but not any pictures of him in existence, would be Herod the Great. We'll talk more about all the Herods on Sunday. When we talk about the coinage that Jesus knew, coins that Jesus knew. The Herods, of course, very intertwined into the life of Christ. And we'll take a look at them, but we don't have any images of Herod. He was mostly known for being a great architect, and that's why he's known as Herod the Great. Also, he is kind of the founding father of the Herodian dynasty. And the interesting thing about him and his children, they're all named Herod. So it gets really confusing. Even the girls are named Herod. So they're Herodias, right? So they're all named Herod. Herod this, Herod that. And it gets confusing as which Herod is which. And we'll talk about all of that in greater depth on Sunday. You have Augustus. He was originally named Octavian, and he became the adopted son of Julius Caesar. You'll remember that Julius Caesar is the one who founded the Roman Empire. So it was the Roman Republic under the power of the Senate. He was a very powerful general who had made some major conquests, and he was very, very popular. And he had something else that was very important if you want to become emperor, a huge army that would follow him and do whatever he said to do. He was told not to cross the river to come into Roman territory with his army, but he did. They were preparing for battle. They expected to fight with Rome, these Roman soldiers, in order for him to become emperor, but instead he was hailed as Caesar, and he took over. But you will remember that he met a not so good end where all the senators stabbed him until he was dead in this assassination. And they expected, Brutus and Cassius and all these guys, what they expected was the people are going to rally behind us and commend us for killing this tyrant leader who's thrown away our republic and established an empire. That is not what happened. What happened instead are the people were angry that they had killed this great dynamic leader that they all looked up to and admired. They wanted an emperor, they wanted a king, and instead they became outcasts and they had to flee for their lives. And all of the people in line to become emperor when Julius Caesar died start banding together to attack his assassins. So you have what's called the Second Triumvirate, which is a $15 word, which just means the three guys who were most likely to become Caesar got together and said, let's go kill Caesar's assassins. So they go after Brutus and Cassius and all of those guys. That's Octavian, Mark Antony, and Lepidus. And Lepidus is kind of minor. He gets exiled. But Mark Antony, of course, he bands up with Cleopatra and tries to control the east and the south. Octavian controls the rest. And then eventually, after they've hunted down Brutus and Cassius and all of them, they turn on each other. And Augustus, Octavian, is the eventual winner of that. He beats them. He beats Cleopatra and Mark Antony at the Battle of Actium. Massive battle. And during this war, the most important thing that happens, the Library of Alexandria gets burned to the ground. So very sad for me, so since I'm a librarian. He becomes the emperor and, of course, issues many, many coins. You see him there. He's rather young on that coin at the bottom. And he's announcing, as so many of them did, with a comet, he's saying, look, I'm coming to power with this divine sign of this comet. He is emperor for a long while. We see him, he is the emperor when Jesus is born in Luke 2 and verse 1. His dying words in AD 14, his public dying words were, I found Rome of clay, I leave it to you of marble. But his actual dying words to his friends and family that were with him were, have I played the part well? So he kind of rode this line that Julius Caesar was never able to do. He was always very arrogant and condescending to the Senate. Augustus tried to appease the Senate, and even though he was really in power and could stop them from doing anything that he didn't want them to do, he would put SC, Senate Consensus, on the back of his coins and try to appease the Senate. He would propose legislation. I mean, he was going to make sure it got passed, but he'd go through the look of letting the Senate pass it, debate it, those sorts of things. But he was really the emperor, and he was in charge. About 3 years before he died, he let Tiberius become Augustus with him. And so we see in Luke 3 and verse 1, it talks about the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius. That's talking about the year 26. As we see Tiberius come to power after Augustus dies, he fully becomes the emperor. And Luke 3:1 really sets the time limit for the life of Christ. And we'll talk about that more on Sunday. All right. And he's also mentioned in Matthew 22:15 through 22, as they're tempting Jesus and trying to test him about paying taxes to Caesar. They're talking about Tiberius. So the two emperors during the life of Christ are Augustus when he was small and Tiberius for his adult life. All right. I forgot to click to the next thing. That's Tiberius right there, and that's the famous coin with his mother sitting on the back as a goddess. All right, the next emperor that's mentioned in the Bible is Claudius. He's mentioned a couple of times because upon the assassination of Caligula, so Caligula is not mentioned in the Bible, but he was the last remaining candidate from the Julio-Claudian family, and Claudius evidently thinks they're going to wipe out his family so they can become, somebody else could become emperor. So he runs and hides. And the Praetorian Guard finds him hiding in a curtain in a palace. He pulls him out from the curtain. He thinks he's going to kill him, and he declares him the emperor. So Claudius becomes emperor. Not a great emperor. It's not a great way to start, hiding to become emperor. But in Acts 11:28 through 30, there's mention of a famine that happens during the reign of Claudius. And it's really important if you're an emperor. There's always one rule that you really have to remember, and that's feed bread to the people. Bread and circuses, right? That's the phrase. If you do not feed your people bread and give them that for free, they will turn on you. And so he had some trouble, but we'll talk more about him tomorrow night as his wife Agrippina and Nero, who is the next emperor, the Emperor Nero. I put a lot of study into Nero, and we will talk more about him. Claudius also is the one, by the way, who Priscilla and Aquila in Acts chapter 18:2, they're kicked out of Rome because they are Jewish Christians. But that's mentioned, this expulsion of the Jews out of not the Roman Empire, but out of Rome, because they kept causing trouble at the instigation of the followers of Christ. That's mentioned in a Roman archive about Claudius. It's one of the extra biblical mentions of Christians really early on in the first century. All right, Nero. We're going to talk more about Nero tomorrow. He is the Caesar that Paul appeals to in Acts 25, 9 through 12. And in Philippians 4:22 is the only other mention of Nero. It's not mentioned by name, but he says, Paul sends greetings to them. He says that particularly those of the Christians that are in the household of Caesar. That Caesar would be Nero. So in Nero's household, there were Christians. That doesn't mean they were relatives. It could be his slaves, his freedmen, or it could be some of his other staff, or it could be some of his relatives or his guards. All of those would have been considered the household of Nero. But some of them that are very close to Nero were Christians. And so that's very interesting. The first time we see Christians coming in contact directly with an emperor. Other people that are mentioned are King Aretas IV. It's a brief mention, but it's in Damascus. The governor under Aretas, the king, kept the city of Damascene with a garrison, desirous to apprehend me. That's what Paul says in 2 Corinthians 11:32. Relating the story in Acts chapter 9, where he's in Damascus and he has to be let down in a basket because he couldn't go through the gate, because those who were following King Aretas, they were wanting to appease the Jews and they wanted to capture Paul. There are coins of King Aretas. He was the ruler of the Nabateans. He never really bent the knee to Rome. So he's a very unique standout. It's like the Parthians and the Nabateans. They never were fully conquered by Rome at that time. Later, under Trajan, they're able to put down the Nabateans. And you see their reign is down here where Petra is. That was their capital. Excuse me. Their capital is Petra. I haven't been able to go to Petra, but I would love to go. It's in Jordan, and it is accessible for people to go. And it kind of goes up here and grabs Damascus. So there are coins featuring him, but they are not very good. You can't tell very much about him, not very high quality. It's interesting, too, when you do research or you Google some of these people, there are those who will attack the Bible and say that the Bible is not accurate and try to point out different discrepancies in the biblical text that contradict what they call the historical record. We're going to study this in depth tomorrow night, but you really need to be careful as a historian or an archaeologist contradicting the Bible, because you're going to be made a fool of eventually. That's happened over and over again. Eventually, you're going to be embarrassed because you're going to be wrong, because the Bible's always right every time. So eventually, they're going to be proven wrong anytime they say that. So I'd avoid doing research on Wikipedia with people who often do not care for the Bible, try to attack the Bible. All right. Another character who is mentioned in the Bible who has his own coinage is Pontius Pilate. Now we're going to study these coins in depth again on Sunday as we look at coins that affected the life of Jesus. Some fascinating stuff, looking at these coins and comparing it to the text of the trials of Jesus. Just some really interesting details that stand out from these coins. He holds the same position that Felix and later Festus holds, which are the next two people we're going to look at that also had coins. He was a procurator, governor, Roman governor of the territory of Judea, so the province or territory of Judea. And we'll go in depth on that on Sunday. Felix, of course, he's the one who, his wife, Drusilla, was Jewish. But it's interesting, other than Pilate, who obviously did not like the Jews very much, he's the only other Roman procurator who kind of challenges the Jewish people a little bit on his coinage. Pilate does so bold-facedly, but Felix, on the back of his coin, has Roman shields, which was kind of saying, was flexing on the Jews and making that point with them. Of course, he's the one who Paul preaches to about righteousness and self-control and the judgment to come. And Felix was afraid. He trembles, right? Says, go away now. I'll call on you later. I have a more convenient time. He did call on him multiple times, but we don't have any record that he was ever converted. Meanwhile, he hoped that Paul would give him a bribe. He was definitely barking up the wrong tree there, but that's what he was hoping. He was hoping to gain something from this in Paul, and when he loses his commission and he's called back to Rome, and Festus takes over in Acts 24:27, he is willing to leave Paul in prison as a favor to the Jews. And so then Festus takes over, and we have the trials before Festus. Festus also, as he's coming into power, we see his coins are very non-confrontational to the Jews. They just have a palm leaf and text on them saying under Tiberius or under Nero, and not Tiberius, it's Nero for Festus. And he's on there trying to appease the Jews. He's trying to find a way to not break the law where Paul is concerned, but also make the Jews happy. And so Paul is forced into appealing to Caesar, and the Caesar that he appeals to is Nero, and so he's sent to Rome. Salome, I mentioned this. This is one of the new cornerstones of my collection, because there's only 10 of these coins known to exist right now. And I was fortunate enough to win one of them at auction. And so I do have this coin. It's very rare that you get any member of Herod's family on a coin. There's only a few. Herod Aristobulus and Herod Philip are pictured on coins because they were very, very Hellenized, and the coins that they minted were way up north. And Caesarea Philippi, which is really Paneas, it's kind of a grove dedicated to the god Pan. And it's also where the gates of Hades were said to be, in this cave that was the mouth of the Jordan. And it is where Jesus said, the gates of Hades will not prevail against the church. So it's a really interesting place, very much connected to the Bible. But Salome, of course, is not mentioned by name. We know her name because of Josephus mentions the daughter of Herodias, and the Bible points out that it is the daughter of Herodias. In Matthew 14:3-12, it says, "For Herod had seized John and bound him and put him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife." These are all Herods, by the way. You've got Herod Philip, and Herodias. So she marries her uncle, then she divorces her uncle and marries her other uncle. So their family tree looks a lot like spaghetti. It's all kind of intermingled. Very strange, right? All right. Another way to look at money of the Bible is through animals, plants, buildings, and transportation means. So we can learn a lot about their world that they lived in by looking at these coins. On these coins, you see actually two extinct species. So this is a species of lion that was the European lion, and is now extinct. And this is a northern forest elephant from Africa. But it's not the normal African elephant that we have now. It was a forest elephant. It was just a little smaller. Both of these species were hunted to extinction by the Romans because they loved to capture them and use them in the circus. And they've even pictured it on coins where they would have men fighting these wild animals. So you'd have a man fighting the elephants, or men fighting these lions. It sounds a little bit strange that they did that for entertainment, but we still have bullfighting today, and sometimes the matador, right? He gets gored by the bull. Some people find that very entertaining, and they do kill the bull in bullfighting, right? Very similar to the Roman fighting of those animals. And of course, there's a camel. I doubt they fought too many camels. Not a very vicious beast, but there's a camel pictured on that coin. Plants. A lot of grain is pictured on coins, and that is, again, you have to feed the people. You have to provide bread to the people if you're the emperor. The breadbasket of America is like Kansas, Nebraska, right? That's where there's these big fields of wheat. Very similar in Rome. The breadbasket of Rome was Egypt. And if there was a problem, if pirates attacked the grain shipment from Egypt, you were going to have a problem as the emperor, keeping your people in check. And so that was very important to them. There's also palm trees, dates, and lilies, lots of things like that. I found it interesting, the crown of thorns, for instance. When I was in Israel, I kept finding different thorn plants. They must have like 50 different species of thorn plants. There's no telling which one it was that made the crown of thorns, but they had plenty to choose from because it's kind of an arid land, and a lot of the plants have giant thorns on them. So it's very, very interesting. I eventually just quit taking pictures and trying to guess which one it was that formed the crown of thorns. But we can learn something from the animals and plants. I've already mentioned the buildings, but here's another coin of the Circus Maximus. Right here. This is where the early Christians, when they faced persecution from Rome, probably died in the Circus Maximus. Not in the Colosseum, at least not under Nero, because the Colosseum had not been constructed yet. Titus is the one who completed the Colosseum. So you can learn something from the buildings and also from transportation. So I was looking at this even today. You look at Acts 27, 14 through 20, and we look at this discussion about the ships, the ship that is caught in the storm. Acts 27, starting in verse 14. Not long after there arose against it a tempestuous wind called Euroclydon. And when the ship was caught and could not bear up into the wind, we let her drive. And running under a certain island, which is called Clauda, we had much work to come by the boat, which when they had taken up, they used helps undergirding the ship, and fearing lest they should fall into the quicksand, strake sail, and so were driven. You look at the different boats that are pictured. He's talking about this type of boat up here that has a sail. They also, of course, had ships of war that had oars. Unlike what you see in the movie Ben-Hur, right, where they have the slaves that are rowing, they wouldn't have used slaves for that. They used trained oarsmen who were paid just like every other Roman soldier. This was their greatest weapon, because if you had men rowing oars, you were not at the mercy of the wind. You didn't have to get the weather gauge to attack other ships. This was the elite weapon of the sea for its time. And so they picture it quite often. They also had these four-horse chariot races that was very popular. And then you see this is a funeral the casket would be inside here, and it would be drawn by 4 horses. That's often pictured, honoring different Romans who had died. And then finally, what we'll end on tonight in the last 10 minutes here, we talk about the events that are pictured on coins. And oftentimes that includes things like the sack of Jerusalem, right? So we talked about this just briefly with the Judea Capta coins, but the Arch of Titus that was created by his brother after he died to deify him, pictures on the Arch of Titus the sacking of the temple and the taking of the candlestick. You've got the table of showbread, the trumpets that are there. That's all being, the Ark of the Covenant's not there because the Ark of the Covenant was no longer in the temple at that time. It had been lost under Babylonian captivity. So, but we see them bragging about that on the Arch of Titus. It's also bragged about on multiple coins by both Vespasian and his son Titus. And Josephus, who was a eyewitness to the sacking of Jerusalem, and also a witness to the triumph that was held afterwards, he writes about each of these events. And I just want to read to you about the excruciating famine. They surrounded Jerusalem. They would not allow people to enter or leave. So if you were trapped in there, the idea is we're going to starve you out. We're going to win by making you weak, and either you're going to give up because there's no food, or you'll be weakened and we'll be able to attack and breach the walls, which is eventually what happened in Jerusalem under Titus. But while the famine was going on, it's just excruciating what happened. Here's how Josephus describes it. And again, he's an eyewitness to these events. He says, "Countless thousands of Jews died of hunger. In every house where there was at least a morsel of food, relatives fought over it. Gaping with hunger, the outlaws prowled around like mad dogs, gnawing at anything, belts, shoes, even leather from their shields. Others devoured wisps of hay. And then there was the incredible horror of Mary of Bethzeba. Distinguished in family and fortune, Mary had fled to Jerusalem from Perea, but her property had been plundered by the tyrants during the siege, and her food by the daily raids of their followers. Maddened by hunger, she seized her own infant and said, 'Poor baby, why should I preserve you for war, famine, and rebellion? Come, be my food.' Vengeance against the rebels and climax of Jewish tragedy for the world. With that, she killed her infant son, roasted his body, and devoured half of it, hiding the remainder. Instantly, the rebels arrived, sniffing the unholy smell of food and threatening her with death if she did not produce what she had prepared. She had reserved a portion for them and replied, uncovering the remnants of her baby. They stood paralyzed with horror. 'This is my child and my action. Help yourselves, for I've had my share. Don't be weaker than a woman or more compassionate than a mother. But if you're squeamish and disapprove of my sacrifice, then leave the rest for me.'" That's how bad it was in Jerusalem under this siege before they took it. And so that adds depth, I think, to the understanding of Jesus' warning about when Jerusalem would fall, and when you see the signs coming, you should flee. Obviously, that's the case, right? Not a very pleasant picture at all. And then I'll end with the idea of Roman triumphs. A triumph, of course, was rarely celebrated. And when they were, it was supposed to be because of some great victory that they had. But the one we're talking about here, this Roman triumph of Titus and Vespasian, was a joint one. After Nero died, the empire fell into chaos. There was no Julio Claudians left, so whoever was going to be the next emperor was unclear. The Senate had their candidate, but the army had another. So you get this rapid succession of emperors. The year 69 AD is the year of 4 emperors. You have Otho, Vitellius, and Galba. And they all kill each other. And then Vespasian comes in and kills Vitellius and takes over. Vespasian was in Jerusalem, sieging Jerusalem. He leaves his son there to finish it. and he comes to take over Rome. He becomes emperor. Titus finishes off Jerusalem, and then he comes home, and he has this great triumph. And when they have this triumph, it's just this amazing party for the entire city of Rome. It says, after a favorable voyage, Titus received an enthusiastic welcome in Rome, just as enthusiastic as Vespasian. His father and Domitian, his younger brother, came out to meet him, and the citizens were overjoyed to see the three princes united. They decided to celebrate their success by one common triumph, although the Senate had declared a separate triumph for each. When the day arrived, the entire city poured out to view the pageant of victory. Before sunrise, all the military forces marched out in companies and divisions under their officers and gathered near the temple of Isis. When dawn broke, Vespasian and Titus appeared, crowned, laureled, clothed in traditional purple robes, and they ascended a tribunal which had been erected for them. Instantly, loud cheering erupted from the troops, which Vespasian acknowledged and signaled for silence. He now rose, covered his head with his cloak, and together with Titus recited the customary prayers. Vespasian then made a short speech to the soldiers and dismissed them for a traditional breakfast the emperors provided. The princes then sent the procession on its way through the triumphal gate, driving via the theaters to give the crowds a better view. Words cannot describe the magnificence of the procession and the articles displayed: gold, silver, ivory, all wrought in various forms, beautiful tapestry worked in Babylon, jewels, crowns of gold, the images of gods made of costly materials. Animals of many species were led along by men clad in purple, and even the horde of captives was well dressed. But nothing in the procession excited so much wonder as the moving stages, some of them 3 or 4 stories high, many enveloped in tapestries, and each vividly representing some episode of the war. Here was to be seen a prosperous country laid waste, and there an enemy slaughtered. Others portrayed huge walls demolished by siege engines, fortresses battered down, an army storming over ramparts, houses thrown down over their owners, hands of the defenseless raised in supplication, temples set on fire, others scenes of blood and famine. On each of these floats was placed the general of one of the captured cities in the same posture in which he had been taken. A number of ships also followed. The spoils were displayed in confused heaps, and above them all were those taken from the temple at Jerusalem, including a golden table, a candelabrum with 7 branches, a copy of the Jewish law. Next came a large group carrying images of victory made of gold and ivory, and finally Vespasian himself, driving his chariot, followed by Titus, while Domitian rode beside him in magnificent apparel, mounted on a steed. They end by killing all the captives that they had taken, and then it's just a party throughout the entire city of Rome. I want to contrast that with Romans chapter 8. This is really the pinnacle of Romans. I love Romans chapter 8, and anytime you're discouraged, I encourage you to read Romans chapter 8. But he says in Romans chapter 8, starting in verse 33, who shall lay anything to the charge of God's elect? It is God that justifieth. Who is he that condemneth? It is Christ that died, yea, rather that is risen again, who is even at the right hand of God, who also maketh intercession for us. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or peril or sword? As written, for thy sake we are killed all the day long. We are counted as sheep for the slaughter. Nay, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him that loved us. He's writing this to the Romans. He's writing this to people who saw these kinds of processions and triumphs. And he's saying, we're greater than that. We are greater than these triumphs with these giant floats and pictures of slaughter and piles of treasure. Through Christ, we are greater than all of that. And that's how I want to leave us today, with that idea that we are greater than that. We are super conquerors, as it is listed in the Greek. So, all right. Thank you very much for your time and the opportunity to come and talk about the coins. I'll be up here with the coins that I have displayed tonight, and happy to answer any questions. Thanks. I'm not clapping anymore.